Do you believe that sexual harassment exists in your workplace?
I believe that there's a possibility of sexual harassment existing everywhere.
And I asked directly if it was in the World Wrestling Federation.
And I don't want it in my organization. I don't want it.
WWE boss Vince McMahon has resigned following sex trafficking allegations from a former employee.
You may have heard about the shocking sex abuse lawsuit being leveled at WWE boss Vince McMahon by a former employee. The scandal couldn't come at a worse time as the WWE signed a massive $5 billion deal with Netflix. So much is on the line. Everyone at the WWE has reportedly been told to not say a word.
It took 30 years, the WWE becoming a publicly traded company, multiple allegations targeting McMahon directly, the right reporters at the right publication getting tipped off, and the revelation of undisclosed hush money payments to lead to his resignation in July of 2022. And with 5 new allegations trickling out throughout the second half of 2022 alone, it can be a lot to keep track of. So here's a primer that looks at all of the allegations of abuse or enabling the abuse of others that have been levied publicly against Vince McMahon since 1992. In early 1992, WWE, then Titan Sports, doing business as the World Wrestling Federation, was rocked by what the Pro Wrestling Torch dubbed Titan Gate, which basically involved various sexual misconduct allegations on the heels of the brewing scandal about steroid abuse in the company. And at the center were Pat Patterson, who was head of wrestling operations, his right-hand man Terry Garvin, and ring announcer and ring crew chief Mel Phillips, who worked directly under Garvin. The allegations at least broadly pointed to Patterson and Garvin engaging in a casting couch culture with male wrestlers and other personnel, while also enabling Phillips to use his job to groom and molest underage ring boys who he brought in as day laborers on his crew.
One story in Allentown was that when you mentioned this Mel Phillips, I was told that when he was caught with a young boy in a car, they talked to this young boy and said, why are you allowing this? And he says, well, I get to go to all the TV tapings here in Allentown or Hamburg, both for free. I get to meet a lot of the wrestlers they introduced me to and even take pictures with a lot of them.
All 3 resigned, although WWE later claimed that Phillips was initially suspended and only Patterson would return, likely benefiting from his greater value to the company and the discrediting of his most vocal accusers, namely Murray Hodgson as well as superstar Billy Graham, who later recanted the claim that he saw Patterson grope an underage boy.
And I saw Pat Patterson with his left arm on the kid's shoulder and his right hand in his crotch. I witnessed this for myself.
Other more credible allegations against Patterson, like those from former ring boy Tom Cole, fell by the wayside as a result, while Garvin vanished from public life.
We have been undergoing an investigation. Our investigation shows us that, again, if anything, there could very well have been some locker room horseplay. There was never anything, to our knowledge, that approached anything illegal or immoral. We don't tolerate that here in the World Wrestling Federation.
I was grabbed on numerous occasions in my testicles and my buttocks by Pat Patterson of the World Wrestling Federation, and Terry Garvin propositioned me when I was 16, offered me cocaine and all kinds of drugs to have sex with him. When I refused, I was let go from the company when I was 16, and then I returned again when I was 19. I was let go again because I refused Terry Garvin's advances.
So Cole hired a lawyer and ended up with a $55,000 settlement to cover lost wages.
However, just as the scandal started breaking publicly in March 1992, McMahon conceded to New York Post columnist Phil Mushnick that he had previously fired Phillips over his suspicion that, in Mushnick's words, Phillips' relationship with kids seemed peculiar and unnatural, only to rehire him again a few weeks later. Although McMahon sued Mushnick and the Post for defamation a year later, even citing other parts of the same article as defamatory, they never disputed his account of the conversation.
Many of you know, several years ago, the World Wrestling Federation and I came under a vicious attack by the tabloid media, led by one Phil Mushnick of the New York Post. It's been the equivalent, in my view, of journalistic stalking.
Former referee Rita Chatterton alleged that McMahon had sexually assaulted her in a limousine back in 1986. She also provided a much more detailed account on Rivera's talk show Geraldo a week later. According to Chatterton, she met McMahon in his limo where he forced himself on her twice, then fired her by invoking a rule he had previously mentioned about her not being able to fraternize with co-workers.
When I couldn't complete his desires, he got really angry, started ripping off my jeans, pulled me on top of him, and told me again, if I wanted a $500,000-a-year contract, I had to satisfy him. He could make me or break me, and if I didn't satisfy him, I was blackballed. That was it. I was done. When Vince was all said and done, Vince just sat back and said, at one point when I first met Vince, let me back up here just a little bit. The very first time I met Vince, I was told that if I had any sexual relationships with anyone in the Federation, I was done. My career was done. I was engaged. I had no problem with that. When Vince was said and done, Vince looked at me and said, do you remember what I told you about having sexual relationships with anyone? Well, you just did. And he just sat back and had this big smile and this big grin and just started laughing at me.
McMahon would sue Chatterton as well as Rivera and his associates in February of 1993, albeit alleging a civil conspiracy as opposed to defamation, before dropping the suit a year later. Chatterton didn't breathe a word of the allegations publicly for the next 3 decades. In June of 2022, coming off of the initial Wall Street Journal article about McMahon settling sexual misconduct claims, Chatterton broke her silence in a New York Magazine article giving additional context while pointing to the Geraldo episode for the details of her allegations. But more newsworthy though was that Chatterton was now supported by another outcry witness, Mario Mancini, who went to wrestling school with her.
You know, and I shortly after that I walked into an arena and of course she was there, and you know, I went up to say hello to her. Why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? We're at the same school and we got close and she just started crying. I said, well, what are you crying for? She goes, I wanted to talk to Vince and I got into his limo and I went, oh, tell me you didn't do that. She said it was terrible. And she told me the story. And I said, you're done. You're through. You'll never work again. You're done. Through. And shortly after that, she was gone.
On November 3rd, the same journal article reported that a lawyer for Chatterton sent McMahon a demand letter for $11.75 million, with McMahon pledging not to pay her. The letter said that the damages were hard to overstate, including years of ongoing depression, substance abuse, disordered eating, lost income, and an overall decreased quality of life. In addition, later that month, Chatterton gained the ability to sue McMahon for damages stemming from the alleged assault, thanks to New York's Adult Survivors Act signed in May of 2022, which created a 1-year window suspending the statute of limitations on civil sexual assault claims. In January of 1983, Superfly Jimmy Snuka, the then top babyface in the WWF, was arrested just outside of Syracuse, New York on charges of assaulting his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, as well as various law enforcement officers who responded to the scene. On May 11th in Whitehall, Argentino died of a skull fracture, and the narrative would shift on and off over the next 37 years. But what really can't be disputed anymore was the fact that regardless of which version of his story Snuka told, he never claimed that anyone else was with them, and the coroner ruled the case a homicide. Despite the autopsy findings and Snuka never providing a story that could have accounted for someone else killing Argentino, the paper trail stopped cold after his second Whitehall police interview. There, Snuka was joined by McMahon, and unlike every other interview in the case, the investigating officer's report did not recount anything that was said. And for Snuka's part, he claimed in his 2012 memoir that McMahon entered the meeting with a briefcase and left without it. A year later, the prosecutor's office lied to the Argentino family lawyer and said that Nancy's death had been ruled an accident.
WWE star Jimmy Snuka made a name with his flashy moves in the wrestling ring, but tonight he's out on bond in New Jersey accused of killing his girlfriend 3 decades ago.
Eyewitness News reporter Josh Eider tonight speaking with the victim's sister. Josh.
And Bill, according to the criminal complaint, Jimmy Snuka told 7 different versions of how his girlfriend died in just the first day after her death. And when prodded by the victim's family for 32 years, the DA finally submitted the case to a grand jury, which voted to indict him for murder.
The case was dismissed just days before his 2017 death, although this was basically stemming from him being ruled incompetent to stand trial a year earlier. It took over a decade after Titangate before Vince McMahon was accused of sexual misconduct again, this time coming the weekend of the 2006 Royal Rumble event. McMahon was then in Boca Raton, Florida, where he had a seasonal residence and went to a local tanning salon called Tanzibar to refresh his tan for one of the biggest shows of the year. There, the clerk would allege in a police report that McMahon showed her nude photos of himself unprompted and then forcibly groped her. And when she managed to get away, she said McMahon told her that he was only trying to have some fun. The Palm Beach Post broke the story a few days later with Vince's wife, Linda, telling them that the allegations were totally bizarre, while their daughter, Stephanie, confirmed that Vince was a Zanzibar regular. After a South Florida Sun-Sentinel newspaper followed up about McMahon not being charged a month later, the story vanished for a dozen years. However, it was revived in January of 2018 when the Daily Beast unearthed the original report, revealing that police felt that there was now probable cause to charge McMahon. 2022's biggest wrestling news story kicked off on June 15th when the Wall Street Journal reported that WWE's board of directors was using an independent law firm to investigate a $3 million settlement that Vince McMahon paid a former subordinate months earlier. The investigation started in April after the board got a series of anonymous emails from someone claiming to be a friend of the women in question who had worked for the WWE as a paralegal, and it had turned up additional settlements with other women. The paralegal had, according to the emails, gotten a 100% raise after beginning a sexual relationship with McMahon, from $100,000 annually to $200,000. The emails further alleged that Vince passed her around like a toy to then talent relations head John Laurinaitis, becoming his assistant in the process, with the situation further deteriorating from there. Meanwhile, a WWE spokesperson has stated that the relationship was consensual, and it doesn't appear that anyone was arguing the relationship was not consensual in the criminal sense, although in recent years the collective mindset has shifted as to whether or not someone can fully consent to sex with their boss in the first place. The aforementioned second Wall Street Journal article, which came out on July 8th of 2022, painted a significantly more bleak picture of McMahon's alleged behavior, as it revealed that 3 more of his settlements with former subordinates found by the board's investigation took the total amount to over $12 million, with one, a $7.5 million settlement, accounting for the majority of that figure. That settlement went to a woman who the journal described as a former wrestler who alleged that Mr. McMahon coerced her into giving him oral sex and then demoted her and ultimately declined to renew a contract in 2005 after she resisted further sexual encounters. Of the settlements that were reportedly uncovered in the board's investigation, it's the only one where the allegation of sexual contact is framed as coerced, with the woman in question apparently suggesting that she did not fully consent. The settlement didn't come back in 2005 when the wrestler was fired, though it came in 2018 after the wrestler and her lawyer reached out to McMahon and negotiated the $7.5 million settlement in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. That would place it just after the Me Too movement blew up in the wake of the reporting about Harvey Weinstein's misconduct in the New York Times and the New Yorker. And elsewhere in the July 8th story, the journal described the other 2 newly discovered settlements as being a woman who described herself as a WWE contractor who presented the company with unsolicited nude photos of McMahon that she said he had sent her, which pretty much echoes the tanning salon attendant's allegation previously, while also accusing him of sexual harassment more broadly. This resulted in a $1 million settlement in 2008. The other woman described herself as a former manager who had worked for over 10 years for Mr. McMahon before he allegedly initiated a sexual relationship with her, where she was paid $1 million to keep quiet about it in a 2006 settlement. WWE Diva Search winner Ashley Massaro, who died by suicide in 2019, his name also came up specifically when her ex-boyfriend Paul London accused McMahon of obsessively pursuing her while she worked under him in the WWE.
But I do remember specifically many times when she would be crying to me because Vince was propositioning her to fly on the jet with them. Like Kevin Dunn, Bucktooth Bucky would be telling her that she has to fly on the jet with him, or that he might, possibly, or every now and then, if she was at the, they'd always put the divas up at like the TV hotel or whatever. He'd be knocking on her door and, trying to get her to answer. And it's just like, I'm shocked this Vince stuff is just now coming out. I mean, I haven't looked up on a lot of it and like, well, I want to get the details because I just would rather not, but I'm surprised it hasn't come out within the last 10 years. But that just goes to show how afraid people are of that power dynamic, where they're so fearful of losing their job, or, it's like, what does that say about you if you're protecting this 90-year-old fucking corpse with a thong tan line just because he's a billionaire?
This woman alleges that in 2011, when she was working as a spa manager, Vince McMahon sexually assaulted her at the 5-star resort in Southern California where she was working at the time. She also told her husband, which led him showing up at a WWE event with a baseball bat looking for McMahon, only to be turned away by security.
The women involved in the World Wrestling Federation, from China all the way down, are very, very strong-willed women who, generally speaking, at the end of the day in the soap opera, get what they want and then some.
Now, in conclusion, with regards to all these allegations against Vince McMahon, where there's smoke, there's generally fire. And in this case, there seems to be a shitload of smoke. Now, the one thing that interests me is that how many of these top-tier stars, like the Dwayne Johnsons of the world, the Triple H's, Shawn Michaels, you name it, how many of these stars knew about what was going on? Because surely, logic dictates they had to be aware of something. And what does it say about them that, if they knew and they did nothing about it? So that's pretty interesting to me. I'm not that invested in the WWE. I watched it as a kid. I've done a few segments with regards to the Chris Benoit murders, as well as Owen Hart's death, which was handled in a very, I suppose, debatable way by the WWE and by Vince McMahon. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what does happen in the end with regards to Vince, whether he gets prison time, or more than likely he'll just pay everyone off, as it seems like he's been doing since the 1980s.
Let me just say, I've made mistakes, obviously, both personally and professionally through my 50-year career. I've owned up to every single one of them and then moved on.
But in any case, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.